The life of an average American in the 1960s was fairly simple. The traditional American family would consist of a husband, a wife, and their children. The husband worked to provide for his family, while the wife took care of the home and the upcoming of the children. The 1960s economy made it much easier for the average American to afford homes, cars, gas, and most importantly, food. You could buy a large quantity of fruits and vegetables for a couple cents. You could buy 3 pounds of apples for 49 cents, a pound of asparagus for 19 cents, iceberg lettuce for 25 cents, and a pound of California grapes for 14 cents. California was one of the biggest agricultural producers in the United States. Its rich land and climate made it a perfect place for vegetation to thrive. The agricultural business was quickly expanding, the production demand was high, and the agricultural industry became more profitable. Meanwhile, those who worked in the fields were often in economic need and had to labor in inhumane work conditions. Most farm workers were Mexican Americans who were often exposed to deadly chemicals and had inadequate food and shelter, and experienced sexual harassment, all while receiving horrible wages. They were known as the invisible minority. César Estrada Chávez was born on March 31, 1927 in North Gila Valley, close to Yuma, Arizona. He was one of 6 children born to the Chávez family. Although Chávez was American, he did not live like the average American kid. His parents lost their ranch and a small grocery store during the Great Depression. In order to survive, Chávez and his family became migrant farm workers, and they often traveled around California looking for work. Chávez attended a total of 30 different schools as his family migrated from place to place looking for employment. Unfortunately, in order to support his family, Chávez dropped out of school after the 8th grade in order to work along with his parents and provide for his family. At the age of 18, Chávez joined the Navy in 1946 and served in the West Pacific. In 1952, Chávez embarked on his community organizing career under the tutelage of Fred Ross, a renowned organizer who was establishing the San Jose branch of the Community Service Organization, a prominent civil rights group focused on Latino issues. For a decade, Chávez worked with the CSO, spearheading voter registration and Get Out the Vote campaigns, championing causes against racial and economic inequality, and establishing new CSO chapters throughout California. Despite his many successes, Chávez had a greater ambition: to form a union that would defend and advocate for the impoverished and powerless farm workers he identified with. However, he was aware of the bleak history of farm worker organizing, marked by failed unions and suppressed strikes through violent means. He acknowledged that for a century, many individuals with more substantial resources and education than him had attempted but ultimately failed to organize farm workers. Furthermore, he was aware that the experts deemed the task of organizing farm workers as insurmountable. In the 1950s, while working for the CSO, Chávez met 28-year-old schoolteacher Dolores Huerta. Just like Chávez, Huerta wished to contribute to the cause.
These kids, you're obviously very hungry. Can I get a voucher for shoes, free lunch for these kids? And his response was, their parents, all they do is drink up all their money. I knew he was wrong.
Huerta left her teaching position to work for the CSO. It was not long before Chávez approached her with an idea that would change the course of history forever. Chávez understood the struggles of those who worked in the fields, since his family and himself had worked in them for years. Farm workers would often spend countless hours in the heat without clean water or restrooms. They worked hard to put food on the nation's tables, meanwhile theirs were empty. They were not covered by minimum wage laws and made as little as 40 cents an hour. Chávez knew something had to change sooner or later. On March 31, 1962, Chávez left the CSO and moved himself and his family to Delano, California. With his life savings, he then created the National Farm Workers Association, which started with Chávez, Helen Favela Chávez, and their 8 children. On September 30, 1962, the National Farm Workers Association held its inaugural convention with hundreds of delegates gathering at a deserted movie theater in Fresno. During the gathering, the group unveils its distinctive flag, which features a black eagle emblem displayed on the white circle against a red background. This became a sign of Mexican pride. Previous unions in the United States were associated with violence and destruction. César Chávez knew that violence was not the way to approach this, since previous strikes had ended in failure and death. Instead, Chávez and Huerta were inspired by the non-violent civil disobedience by Gandhi in India. In 1965, Chávez and Huerta traveled California's valleys to recruit members for the NFWA. Meanwhile, Ellen Chávez worked in the fields to support the family. They talked to those who were experiencing humanitarian and economic injustice. the ones who were too afraid to say anything due to fear of losing their jobs or getting sent back to their country of origin. The NFWA later became the United Farm Workers of America. Under challenging conditions, César was able to establish the first successful farm workers union in history. In September, Chávez and Dolores Huerta led the NFWA in a strike against grape growers, and they joined forces with the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, a labor group composed of Filipino Americans. The strike ended up lasting 5 years. In March 1966, Senator Robert F. Kennedy took part in the Senate Subcommittee of Migratory Labor hearings. During the proceedings, he listens to the Kern County Sheriff describe how his deputies arrested non-violent picketers due to threats from the striking growers. In response,
how can you go arrest somebody if they haven't violated the law?
They're ready to violate the law. In other words,
could I suggest from the luncheon period of time that the sheriff and the district attorney read the Constitution of the United States?
Leading the charge for La Causa of Farm Workers, Chávez embarks on a 340-mile march from Delano to Sacramento, and his efforts result in the merging of the NFWA and the AWOC, which gives birth to the United Farm Workers. In 1967, Chávez expanded his efforts beyond the strike by initiating a nationwide boycott of non-union California table grapes, and he dispatched UFW workers to different cities across the United States to increase awareness. This move coincides with the civil rights movement and a heightened awareness of discrimination and economic disparity. The boycott garners support from millions of Americans and eventually extends beyond national borders to become an international movement. During 1968, in February and March, Chávez undergoes a 25-day fast to recommit himself to advocating for justice through non-violent means. The fast results in Chávez losing 25 pounds. Later, during the mass where Chávez breaks his fast, Senator Robert F. Kennedy joins him and louts the labor leader as one of the heroic figures of our time. In 1970, the United Farm Worker 5-year-old strike and boycott against grape growers culminated in a triumph for the union. Previously, large agribusinesses had suppressed strikes through violent means or negotiated insignificant one-time pay raises. However, this time, the union manages to secure more comprehensive rights, including the ability to organize and bargain collectively, as well as improved wages. This was not enough. Chávez then boycotted lettuce. The battle was not over in 1972. Chávez partook in a second fast after laws in Arizona banned farm workers from organizing a boycott or striking. During the spring and summer of 1973, when the United Farm Workers 3-year grape contracts come up for renewal, grape growers, including E&J Gallo Winery, opt to sign agreements with the Teamsters without holding an election or engaging in any representation process. This decision prompts a bitter strike by grape workers in California's Coachella and San Joaquin valleys that last for several months. Around 3,500 non-violent strikers are arrested for violating anti-picketing injunctions, and many of these injunctions are later deemed unconstitutional. Additionally, hundreds of strikers are beaten, dozens are shot, and 2 are killed. In response to the violence, Chávez decides to call up the strike and launch a second grape boycott. Once again, strikers, union staff, and volunteers travel cities across North America to garner supports for boycotts of table grapes, lettuce, and Gallo wine. In 1975, California passes the groundbreaking Agricultural Labor Relations Act, which guarantees the right of all farm workers to create labor unions and negotiate for better wages and working conditions. This legislation is a significant victory for workers who had previously been excluded from collective bargaining and labor protections. The act paves the way for other states to follow California's lead in providing essential rights and protections to agricultural workers. A few years later, farm workers were still under unsafe conditions. Chávez kicked off his Grapes of Wrath campaign to draw attention to the pesticides which were poisoning farm workers and their children. Throughout July and August from 1988 in Delano, at the age of 61, Chávez observes his final and lengthiest public fast of 36 days, drawing attention to farm workers and their children affected by the pesticides. In the late 80s and early 90s, after recuperating from his fast, Chávez persists in promoting the grape boycott and supporting the farm workers wishing to unionize. The UFW emerges victorious in elections representing tomato workers in San Joaquin County, and workers at the state's largest tree fruit company vote for the UFW. Throughout the spring and summer of 1992, collaborating with the UFW first vice president Arturo Rodriguez, Chávez spearheads vineyard walkouts in Coachella and San Joaquin valleys, resulting in the first industry-wide paid increase for grape workers in 8 years. On April 23, 1993, Cesar Chavez passes away at the humble residence of a retired San Luis, Arizona farm worker while protecting the UFW from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed by Bruce Church Incorporated, a large vegetable grower.